So this is my video for explaining how I design and deploy an S&C strength conditioning program for jiu-jitsu athletes. So I'm going to take the opportunity here to explain in as much detail as possible how I've designed this, my understanding of the sport. Again, I'm not an expert in jiu-jitsu. I don't claim to be. I'm a white belt. It's something my passion for jiu-jitsu has been flourishing. I've been loving it. But this is not jiu-jitsu advice. This is strength and conditioning advice. So just to declare the limitations of my knowledge for the sport. But my passion is there. So I hope to continue the sport for a long time. But within the S&C domain, we need to work backwards from the sport itself. We need to understand what is going on so that we can design around those demands. It's a popular combat sport, but it's a grappling-based sport. It has no striking or kicking. There's two different categories, gi and no gi. That will affect the style or the approach of the individual athletes to competition, or their even grappling styles. So again, one thing I would say is there's a variety of elements of jiu-jitsu. There is judo, Greco-Roman wrestling, different elements like that to consider. So while we are focusing on jiu-jitsu, a lot of these elements have been kind of incorporated into jiu-jitsu. So you can see a wide range in styles. So competition rounds, depending on the level of the athlete and the level of the competition, 5 to 10 minutes. That's quite important for later on. Weight class sport, if you are working with a competitive athlete, you need to consider that as well, and divided by age. It is a high intensity anaerobic glycolytic primarily sport. There is a high frequency of injuries to the knees, elbows, and shoulders, with other joints as well. Work with the individual, all right? Some athletes will struggle with certain areas. And again, this is going to be very individual, but most commonly knees, elbows, and shoulders. 2 out of 3 participants in the sport long-term will experience severe injuries to these areas. I do a Merck's analysis, which is muscles, energy systems, range of motion, contraction type, and speed of movement. So speed of contractions. I want to start with a speed. This is a speed and range of motion. Excuse me. This is an incredibly fast sport at high level of competition. Again, depending on the style that's being used, but typically, like, you'll see high level athletes move lightning fast, especially if they're approaching things with like a judo or wrestling style. Takedowns can happen in an instant. You're talking on like a second at most. It would be considered quite slow. So contraction types, you're looking at the whole range: eccentric, concentric, and isometric. Ranges of motion. So you can see I have up there the planes of motion: frontal, sagittal, and transverse. What that means is essentially frontal is left-right movement. There's left-to-right movement, and there's forward-back movement in sagittal plane. And then there's transverse rotational movement. So it's a dynamic sport using the full body. All the muscles are used, from the smallest ones to stabilize your shoulders, hips, neck, everything like that. It's a very comprehensive training demand. So, like, if you're doing jiu-jitsu and you do it for the first few times, say in a more competitive session, mat session, you'll notice your full body is pretty much sore. There's not a muscle that isn't worked. Now, the better you get, the more efficient you get. So you won't feel, say, unnecessary tension. So the more proficient you get, the more efficient you get. Energy systems, as I said, the rounds tend to last between 5 and 10 minutes. When we train an athlete, we don't want to train them as total specialists, right? Because if a competitive round ever speeds up and they go for high pace, high intensity approaches or attacks, and they're only used to 10 minutes of work, we've done them a disservice. So we do need to look at the energy systems that sandwich that anaerobic glycolytic. So yes, you do need a good capacity of oxidative capacity, ability to use oxygen to process energy, but also that instantaneous release of energy through the ATP phosphocreatine system as well. So oxidative is your base of energy, is what we use all the time. We're using oxygen to break down energy molecules and release it. So oxidative, we need a big base, but we also need to be quite effective and efficient at the high intensities too. So if you think of the rising tide lifts all boats, but also relative intensity, if you can raise the ceiling up, the relative intensity down here is decreased. So if you can keep, if you can develop an athlete's ability to produce power or high intensity actions, everything that was once at, like, say, 50%, if it's raised by a certain amount, can be decreased to about 30, 40%. Okay, so if you increase what is 100%, relative intensity down here decreases. Okay, so yes, we want to become very effective in utilizing or operating within the anaerobic glycolytic system. Don't forget about the other two energy systems there. Again, a good base of say aerobic capacity or oxidative capacity can push up lactate threshold as well. So there's two kind of approaches to it, as well as getting really comfortable within that energy system. So energy systems, range of motion, as I said, it's full body rotational flexion extension, lateral flexion as well, contraction type, everything. It's a very dynamic sport. It's before I started it, I really couldn't appreciate it. It's fantastic. It's very impressive. Just to give you a look-see, now this isn't only one of those is actually in a jiu-jitsu match specifically. The rest are mixed martial arts. But you can see the kind of joint locks that are already there. So you can see how the body's positioned, lateral flexion and essentially extension for the guillotine, again, lateral flexion and extension for the knee bar, arm bar, rear naked choke, or no, it's a heel hook, sorry. Again, like this is everything has to coordinate together. Okay, so the common submissions, you can almost demonstrate the demands for a generalized movement capacity. You need to be healthy and well-rounded to be able to move and move powerfully through a variety of planes of motion and a combination of planes of motion. So I have a 2-day base for training for jiu-jitsu, pardon. And there's two themes of it: immovable object and unstoppable force. Within the immovable object day, we're looking at sheer force generation. Okay, can we move weight? Are we strong through typical essentially patterns: hinge, squat, press, pull? Okay, within this I incorporate quite a few carries as well, and common areas for issue. So like neck isometrics against benches, or using Swiss balls or bands, anything like that, just to develop the neck muscles. Waiters walk, so an overhead hold, front-loaded carries, anything like that. Again, we just want to develop the connective tissue around the upper body through the elbows and shoulders. Again, really common injury sites. The upper body here, again, you have quite a range of reps, from 5 to 15 reps through pushing and pulling. This is more of a, say, a hypertrophy and strength development workout, right? This is your base for strength. Okay, we go from bilateral hinge to unilateral squat patterns as well, depending on the athlete. Again, this can vary massively depending on the recovery capacity of the athlete, their training schedule. Depending on the person in jiu-jitsu, they might train 3 times a week, and they might train every day or maybe twice a day. So it really does depend. But within the S&C side of things, a 2-day minimum typically training schedule is what I would start with. I may add mobility training, conditioning, recovery sessions. It does depend, because first, like if you start off and you get into jiu-jitsu, every time you come off the mats, you feel like you've been hit by a truck. So the demands on the body are huge for recovery, right? You've hit the mats multiple times with takedowns. you've been slammed, you get, everything is essentially trying to be pulled out of place. Your body needs to recover. So typically, I might actually reduce volume down to start. I might go 2 or 3 sets per pattern or per exercise, and low to moderate volume with low and moderate intensity, just to get used to jiu-jitsu. Now, if they're already into jiu-jitsu, which is most of the case of the people I work with, they've already developed their recovery capacity. So I can gradually add in, I'll start with the volume first. So the snatch grip RDLs, the split squats, the volume will be there, but the intensities will be much lower. Okay. So we start with volume, we bring in intensity, and then we add velocity on top of that as well, while modulating the two of those. So carries, hinges, squats, push, pull, and then we go to unstoppable force. Depending, I have 2 variations for both of these days at the moment, and I'll have variations off of those as well, depending on the individual. I might have more throws than jumps. I might have more jumps than throws, depending on the day and what I'm looking at. So side throws, rotational throws, med ball slams or hurricane slams. I'll do a back squat and overhead throw, or a trap bar deadlift and overhead throw, a bench press and chest throw, dumbbell row and pal-off press. But it's a power pal-off press. So you drive out, you stabilize at extension. So with this, we're not looking at sheer force. It's not the heaviest that we're trying to go. We're trying to reduce the weight and increase the velocity, the rate of force development, the ability to produce power quickly. Again, if we look back at the contraction speed or contraction type and speed of movement, I've seen people within the sport do slam ball slams and hit about 8+ meters per second. So you're talking about a capacity to move weight fast. All right. So specifically within ballistic exercises. So two essentially pillars: immovable object and unstoppable force. And again, their warm-ups will be can vary, but they're similar enough in terms of including crawls, extensive plyometrics, and what I've been doing recently has been taking advantage of the Plus Plyo series. So I've been doing deep tier plyometrics to get a stretch response at essentially longer muscle lengths. So we do essentially a lunge or a split squat stance and pulse into deep ranges of motion. Again, it helps develop mobility, especially through the hips, but also again that rapid stretch response, developing a tolerance for this rapid stretch response. It also provides a really good base for force production, or essentially rapid force production or high rates of force development later on. So you've added a huge base of extensive plyometrics that can be tapered into intensive quite easily. But yeah, I'll just give you a look at that, and then we'll go into a little bit of nutrition. So this is so much, like, again, energy balance and calories intakes first is your base of nutrition. Jiu-jitsu is incredibly calorically expensive. Okay, you will burn a lot of energy. So you need to make sure you're eating enough food. Okay, there's some really fundamental habits that I encourage people to have. Get enough water, plenty of fruit and veg. There is essentially anti-inflammatory effect around different fruits and stuff like that. So if you find yourself getting very stiff and sore or struggling to recover, plenty of fruit and veg can help that as well. Plenty of protein, 3 or 4, 20, 30 gram servings of protein per day, depending on the weight and the size of the individual and their lean body mass. A general habit for people I tend to encourage is a focused eating environment. No TV dinners, put the phone down, that kind of thing. It's more so important if you tend to overeat. But it's still a pretty good habit to just appreciate the food that's in front of you and be essentially in the one place. And then regular sleep routine, that can help massively with regulating appetite and making sure you recover. So just all of these things are very much included. More scheduled meal times as well, just linked with the sleep and the circadian rhythms of everything. But if we start there. There is a couple of things I want to touch on in terms of the nutrition and supplements specifically. one of my favorite things to ever hear from a fighter, when I was working with them with regards to their nutrition is their acknowledgement, in their own words, it was, I know I'm eating like a child, which is really funny to me. I love that statement. And it makes a lot of sense. Like children are quite fussy eaters. They might only want their chicken nuggets and chips, and they want their sweets and everything like that. And typically, their diet doesn't include all of these really important things like oily fish and all these, fruit and veg. So if there's a tendency to eat like a child, we might look at, say, fish oils or different vitamins or multivitamins to supplement the diet. Now, again, I'm a food first kind of coach, but supplements can provide a very useful, can be very useful. So fish oils, considering EPA and DHA specifically, so looking for the content of your fish oils with regards to EPA and DHA. I actually didn't put in the amounts that I should have put in the amounts you should be hitting. But creatine, 3 to 5 grams daily. You can do a loading dose if you're not currently supplementing with it. Go up to 20 grams a day for a week, and then bring it back down to 3 to 5 grams daily as a maintenance dose. One that is very much overlooked for combat sports is beta alanine. All right. Now I'm going to bring you back up here. 5 to 10 minute rounds and anaerobic glycolytic. It's your lactate, essentially, energy system. Beta alanine acts as a buffer for the hydrogen ions, all right, for the acid that develops within the muscle. Okay, so we can use, say, or beta alanine is converted to carnosine and use the buffer. I think that's the process, but it's used to buffer out that acid, all right, which can help help retain or maintain force production later into rounds, later into fatigue. Okay, so it can delay diminished force production as a result of fatigue and as a result of essentially acidosis. So beta alanine, it doesn't. So creatine has an association for holding onto water weight and everything like that. Again, it's a weight category sport. Some people may not want to essentially supplement with creatine closer to fights, but beta alanine does not have the same issue. You don't essentially hold on to more water with beta alanine. Caffeine, it's hit or miss, to be honest. I'm not a huge fan of pushing for caffeine, especially like unless it's a big competition or someone really wants to. People tend not to, again, it's very individual. One thing I would say is very individual, and it's dependent on someone's habitual usage or kind of intake of coffee or caffeine based or caffeine containing drinks. But the ergogenic effects of caffeine lie within 3 to 9 milligrams, very important, milligrams per kilogram. So if you're 80 kilos, the minimum you would want to consume is 240 milligrams, 45 to 60 minutes beforehand. Now, depending on your tolerance and again, habitual usage, that might be a huge dose. You might only have one coffee a day, and the strength of that can vary massively. You might only be getting 80 milligrams for a weak coffee. If you have a very strong coffee, it could be up to 180. I'm not saying it does depend. It's very hard to nail down the caffeine concentration of coffee because it depends on the bean, depends on the processing of everything. So 3 to 9 milligrams, it does depend on the individual, their response, their sensitivity to it, and what they're doing. So I'm kind of hesitant to include or encourage caffeine amongst these other supplements. Beta alanine, actually, I should mention, has a side effect called paresthesia, which is a tingling, essentially a tingling sensation after consumption. There's no harm to this. It can be uncomfortable, and if people aren't aware of it, it can kind of catch them by surprise. But it is quite a useful supplement. I would look at, say, encouraging athletes to, if they're going into high level of competition and they know they want to be pushing a very high intensity or train at a very high intensity, at least leading up to it, beta alanine supplementation can facilitate that a bit more effectively. Yeah, I don't know. I hope that if there's any more questions or anything like that, I'd love to again answer them. Um, yes, I want to provide as much information and explain my point of view um, as much as possible with these kind of videos. It's long form and kind of discuss these things more in broader terms and more detail. But if there is questions about I haven't covered anything or you have a different approach, do let me know. I love, I say to my coaching sessions, I don't want participation. I love cooperation. I love working with people to get a better answer or a better cue. If I'm trying to get something from someone in terms of a movement result or performance result, I need to work with them. So if there is questions or any feedback, don't hesitate to let me know. But thanks, and I hope you enjoyed.